Okay, it being 6:30, I'm going to call the meeting to order. It's the budget hearing and annual meeting agenda for the Oregon School District for 2018. I'm Steve Zock. I'm the president of the Board of Education this year. This meeting's prescribed by state statute, and it is comprised of two parts. One is a budget hearing, where our business manager, Andy Weiland, will walk through a financial report of the district and then overview the district budget. And then we'll have an opportunity, if there are any questions, to ask him questions about that. And then we'll have the annual meeting portion of the process tonight, in which we will, at the end, adopt a levy, adopt school board salaries, and set the date for the annual meeting next year. This is not a formal meeting of the Board of Education, but we do have board members present today. And Tim LeBrun, Dan Kraus, Barb Feeney, Krista Flanagan. Where are you, Krista? There you are. Krista Flanagan are here. And then Courtney Odorico is out of town, as is Troy Pankratz. And they both notified me that they weren't going to be at the meeting. Our books this year were audited. Every year the district has its financial statements audited, and they've been audited. And before you is the audit letter that we've received from them, and we got an excellent audit report from them. Are you going to touch on that a little bit? No.
Not quite yet.
Okay. So anyway, members of the audience, there is an orange packet that's over there that would contain the agenda that we're going to follow this evening, the ground rules that we're going to propose to be adopted later during the annual meeting portion of that, and some sample motions. So if you don't have that, grab one of those orange documents. With that, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Andy Weiland, our business manager, who is going to give us the district's financial report.
Thank you, Mr. Zock. So financial reports, always good to start kind of where you've been, and then we'll kind of talk a little bit about where we are heading with the budget. So we want to kind of just do a real quick recap of the budget from last year and the performance of it. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to do it by funds. The district is composed of several funds, and we're going to walk through those very, very quickly and just talk about their performance. So the general fund, Fund 10 and Fund 27 are combined. They're kind of our operating funds for the budget. The majority of the money goes through them. So you can see that our revenues last year were within 0.6% from what we had projected in the original budget. We were actually a little bit under the amount of money that we thought we were going to bring in. Not a big deal. A good part of that money was actually because we didn't sell the school home construction house until actually July. So our expenditures, though, were also underneath what we had anticipated. Part of that was the carryover funds. Assigned funds weren't all spent. Some of the funds were left over from the budget, and we're going to talk about that in a second. So we were underspent, and we were actually under-revenued a little bit too, but the difference was to the positive for us. And I can show that here. The budget we started with in October was showed revenues under the expenditures. Again, that's because of our carryover funds. In order to have the building spend funds that they didn't spend in prior years, we have to have our expenditure budget a little bit higher than our revenue budget. That's how you spend down fund balance. So we had a $1.5 million under budget, or basically deficit built into the budget. That didn't happen. We actually ended up increasing the fund balance by about $1 million. The revenue came in a little bit, like I said, lower. Expenditures came in significantly lower than what anticipated. So assigned fund balance, I've mentioned that concept a couple times. What makes up that assigned fund balance? The smallest portion actually is building carryover. So the school budgets that didn't spend all their funds. There's about $300,000 left over in those funds. But then we had department carryover, and that might seem like a large number. We have some grant funds that were not spent last year, so that's built into that number. We also had, if you recall, the Board of Education allocated some funds for capital expenditures last year, about October of last year, and those were not all spent. Some money for playgrounds, those types of things, they're still in there. Director of Instruction carryover, that is starting to reduce, but a number of years ago, the Board of Education allocated some funds to the Director of Instruction to get some initiatives going. So there's still about $130,000 left there. The Oregon Education Compensation System, that's a couple years ago. We had a referendum for that, and so we have some funds that are assigned basically for that purpose down the road. And then the curriculum development, that's similar to the Director of Instruction carryover. Again, funds that are available to Dr. Bergstrom for some virtual instruction things that we're working on. The pool project is something that we've talked a little bit about, not a ton, but you may have noticed that we've been doing some construction at the pool. We've used some TIF dollars, which are funds left over from the Village of Oregon for TIF district that is now completed, that was allocated to the school district to pay for the pool project. What we're doing is we're adding 8 shower areas to the pool, as well as we also built the mechanical room and a couple bathrooms connected to the splash pad, which there's a fundraising group that's working to raise monies for that. So that we'll have those bathrooms, which were part of the project when that happens. So referendum approval, this is the next fund that we're going to talk real briefly about. Basically just showing that we have plenty of equity to make our fund or our loan payments, and a little bit extra actually in that fund. So those 2 payments need to happen before the next levy, so we have to have those funds available, and there was a little bit of a balance left over. Happens because of interest that accrues in the fund. Same thing with Fund 38. We have equity enough to make the payment on 9/1, which actually was a couple weeks ago, and there's a little bit of a balance left over. School improvement funds. This is significantly lower than what it is. Remember, all these numbers that I'm talking about right now are from July 1st. So we're still paying contractors for all the work. We've been going through punch lists, those types of things. We're probably a little bit less than half of that amount of money that's still in a bank account. We've been making some fairly large payments as we've been closing out the projects. Food service fund. This fund actually performed very well, even though it shows a little bit of loss of equity. We spent over $105,000 in capital expenditures last year with a couple different pieces of equipment. So we won't have that type of expenditure every year. So I'm not overly worried that there was a fund decrease of $19,000 because that won't happen every year. So that fund's doing very well. Community Service Fund, we had, this fund's actually supposed to have a 0 balance, so we're going to under levy the $41,000 that's in that budget this year in order to get to that to be a 0 levy this next year. So that's a new change that the legislature made a couple years ago. So don't want a large balance in there, and when balance does accrue, then we have to reduce it. The key component of this slide is OPEB, Employee Trust Funds. This pays for our post-employment benefits for our staff, as well as the trust fund for staff with sick leave conversion. We do have a significant amount of money in there that's accrued over several years. We do invest those funds. The key sentence that's on the bottom there is required by law to basically say that I am the investment manager of those funds. We don't do anything aggressive with those funds. The key component is to make sure that we preserve principal. Made about 1% of interest last year on those funds. So does again pay for health insurance for our employees after they've retired from us, as well as our sick leave dollars for our employees. OPEB liability, this just basically kind of shows that we've been building that balance over years. So each year we've been trying to put a little bit more money into that. I'm sorry, this is the liability. So each year the liability is hopefully decreasing. So from June 2011 or 12, we had about a $10 million liability. In June of 2017, we're down to $3.4 million, and we just approved our OPEB study for this last year, and we're at $3.1 million our liability. And then we've got our balances, what's in those funds. You can see that we've increased them this last year by a little bit in each fund. The OPEB fund, The trust fund will increase or decrease based on what's going on with the employees and how they're using those funds, those retired employees, as well as who's retiring in each year and what their sick leave amount is. The OPEB budget has to increase by a certain amount of money so that we can get reimbursement from the state of Wisconsin for mostly special education categorical aids. So you're going to see that always increase until we fully fund the liability. So that wraps up real quickly where we were for this last year. The funds performed very well. And now we're going to talk about this next year. Some quick components with the preliminary budget. These numbers are all preliminary because our student count just happened last Friday. So we are verifying all our student information, and we will use the remaining month of September and then month of October to kind of finalize those numbers and work through it, and then we'll present the final budget, the original budget, at the end of October. And that's what I just said right there. Key components of our budget: enrollment is estimated. There's a 0 per member increase in our revenue limitation. We do have a categorical aid amount of $654 per member. That actually totals $2.5 million for our district. So the state has been not using the revenue limit and basically giving us allocations per student for the last several years, and it's at $654 this year. General state aid is estimated. That will be known here in a couple weeks what that number is, and that will help determine what the levy is. But we did do a pretty good estimate of it. We'll be close. Special education proration amount, that impacts how much revenue we have available, and that's estimated at this point in time at 25.67. We were in the 30% range when I came here 19 years ago. Equalized assessed value is projected at a 5.8% increase. I believe we'll actually beat that a little bit, but that's a conservative estimate at this point. That won't be known by the end of this week, but wasn't known at the end of today. So revenues by source kind of gives you an idea where our funding comes from. The two largest pieces of the pie come from property taxes and equalization aid. Those two components make up our revenue limit, which is our main funding source for the school district. We do have some funds that come from open enrollment, and then the per pupil student aid is that $654 per student is at 5% of our budget at this point too. It's starting to take over. Federal is very small, 2%, and then other federal under other state funds is about 5%. Major revenues, talked about the revenue limitation formula. 81% of our funds come from that. So it's all based on the number of students. And if you're actually looking at the number of students, you take that 81%, you add the 5% in the per pupil aid increase, the $2.5 million, and so you're actually at 86% of our budget is based on how many kids we have. That's a key component when we're thinking about our financial situation. Are we having more kids, less kids, the same number of kids? That really impacts how we build our budget. Open enrollment increase had a small increase this year as well, both for regular education and special education students, and that does factor into our budget. So new revenues, what are we talking about this year as far as a projection? We've got a revenue limit of $641,000 or $642,000. If you remember, I said there's no increase in the dollar amount per student. The reason that's increasing is because our number of students are increasing. Per pupil aid is $800,000. That's that $200 that we got more per student this year that the state's allocating toward us. Open enrollment, we have a budget of about $89,000 increase related to that for a total of $1.5 million increase in our total general aid, general revenues this year. Let's talk a little briefly about expenditures. You can see the majority of our budget goes where it should, which is in the instructional area. And then instructional support includes a lot of different services that we provide our students. Another 11% comes from that. Administration is 9%. Operations, buildings and grounds, those types of things are about 10%. Transportation 4%, technology 2%, insurance, district liability insurance, those things is 1%, and then debt insurance services is a very small portion. Now, if we take those expenditures and chop them up a little bit differently, rather than purpose, but what those things are, you can see that people obviously make up the majority of our expenses. Salaries are 55.9% and benefits are at 20%, so we're over 75% of salaries and benefits. Hard to compare us to other districts because there's other things that you have to keep in mind. Purchase services of 16%. In our district, we do night cleaning by contracted services for the majority of our people. That's in that purchase services as well as transportation. So depending on our district and other districts, you'd have to maybe add some of that percentage to the employee component. Everything else makes up a fairly small percentage. Operating funds reconciliation. So here we're just trying to basically reconcile back to what the total revenue and expenditure of the operating funds is. So we have a $51.5 million revenue budget, an expenditure budget of $53 million for a difference of about $2 million. What is that $2 million? That's not good to have expenditures over revenues. Well, it's basically all the assigned funds. So the assigned funds makes up the majority of it. With non-referendum debt, that's one of the funds that I talked about a little while ago, making up a small portion of the difference there to get to the total of 1.991640. Assigned funds, I was just going to show you again, the 1.985790 is the assigned fund balance, and that then does tie out to the line item above. So that's where those dollars are again. Referendum debt. So this is key component. We are levying at the same level that we did last year, and we're going to put that gray area will be a part of prepaying our debt service levy in the future, but we're trying to keep our levy the same for debt service at about just under $4.5 million a year. Food service. This just mentions what I talked about before. Even though we had a decrease in fund balance, we just spent a majority, over $100,000 on capital. We did increase our prices by a nickel. That's a good plan to do that every year rather than a large increase. And then we do not anticipate a decrease in fund balance this year. We're hoping revenues equal expenses. Capital projects fund, basically we just need to spend the remaining funds that are left over from the 2015 dollars that were out there, 14 referendum. Employee trust fund, these funds are just available, like I said before, for employee sick leave balances. Tentatively said we're going to decrease that fund by $25,000. OPEB, we have to increase that budget in order to get funding, state aid categorical reimbursement. So we are budgeting an increase of $168,000. Community education, this breaks down the different funding sources for our community education fund, what those components are. You can see we plan to expend about $721,000. $250,000 is for pool operations. Performing Arts Center is about $34,000. Community education outreach, that's the book that we put out, all those different activities that we run in the schools and in the community, $421,000. And then security, that's because our buildings are used by the community, we allocate about $19,000 a year to have a security company come around and make sure the buildings are locked up on weekends. So a couple years ago, the state legislature decided that it was very important at their annual meeting to talk about the community ed and what it funds. So this is just that statement, and I'm not going to read it to you, but it basically just says how we collect money and what we use the money for. So we add up all those different funds to try to anticipate what our tax levy is, and the operational component, those three funds that we've talked about, add up to just under $21 million. Non-referendum debt, that basically pays for our WRS. We talked about that a little bit, but I never told you what it was for. It pays for our unfunded liability for the WRS that we basically refinanced to pay it down quicker. A referendum debt approved, we talked about that. Community services, and then prior levy chargeback, that's just what happens when communities are not able to collect their money from taxpayers. They charge it back to us, we have to pay them, and then we get to collect it again for a total of $26 million. What's going on with the mill rate with this? As we talked about last board meeting, when we had the board approve the preliminary budget, it's actually anticipated to go down to about 10.90, which is similar to the rate in 2009. So we've gone up and back down. And this is just a simple graph that kind of shows what's going on with the mill rate and the equalized assessed values. So our total revenue budget for all funds is just under $60 million this year anticipated. And our expenditures at $62 million. Again, the difference being the unspent funds from the prior years, the assigned fund balance that we've talked about. So this is my favorite sheet. Kind of tells you in one quick slide what's going on with the district. You can see the difference of the assigned funds for the general fund, the 1.985790 decrease in the general fund. You see the other funds pretty much being zeros. The non-referendum debt is just basically a timing thing with debt service payments and how much money we already have in the fund. So there's a reduction there of almost $6,000. Debt service fund will have a remaining balance in that fund. Referendum bond fund, that should be spent. We do not anticipate having additional funds left in there. Food service is even. Trust funds is a slight increase. And community education fund is a little bit of a decrease. Remember, we're trying to target that zero that we talked about. And then cooperative purchases, that's Carl Perkin funds. Those are grant funds that are managed, and that's every year anticipated to be a zero. We manage that for a couple different school districts. So that is the extent of the preliminary budget hearing. I open it up to any questions that you have. There were packets that kind of followed along a little bit of what we've talked about today. And then it was actually the format that has to be printed in the paper for the annual meeting, which was a week or two ago.
Anybody have any questions for Andy Weiland regarding the budget? Okay. Thanks, Andy.
Yep.
Seeing none, we'll close that portion of our annual meeting and move to the formal annual meeting portion of that. So I'll call that to order at 6:51 p.m. We need to elect a chairperson, and we'll need nominations for the chair of the meeting. Are there any nominations? Okay, Krista Flanagan with the motion, and could you give Katie, if you've got the address, we'll need to put the addresses in. Is there a second to that? Or are there any other nominations? I don't think that needs a second. Any other nominations? Are there any other nominations? Okay, I'd entertain a motion then to close nominations and to elect Steve Zock as the chairperson for the 2018 annual meeting. Is there a motion to that effect? Mr. LeBrun with the motion. Could you state your address for Katie Fries? 933 County Road, MM. I did it again, didn't I, Katie? Is there a second to that motion? Barb Feeney with the second, and you can get that from her. All those in favor of that motion to appoint Steve Zock as the chairperson signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you. The second item, or actually the third item on our agenda then, is to appoint a parliamentarian for the annual meeting, and I will appoint Gina Jonan, who has her Robert's Rules of Order with her. We need to adopt the ground rules. The ground rules have been reviewed by the Board of Education and are in your packet, and so I would need a motion to approve the ground rules as set forth in our packet tonight. Is there a motion to adopt those ground rules? Ms. Feeney with the motion and Ms. Flanagan with the second. Is there any discussion regarding the ground rules? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting the ground rules that are contained in our orange packet signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? We have ground rules for this evening. The minutes from last year's annual meeting are contained in the orange packet. Those do not get formally approved at the following year's annual meeting, and we will dispense with the reading of those. Those will be found in the packet. And that takes us to the superintendent's State of the District report before we move on to the adoption of levy. And I'm going to turn the floor over to Dr. Brian Bussler, our superintendent.
Good evening, everyone. I know we have a smaller group here, but usually at the annual meeting, we also have a couple of hundred people watching us live, and then there's a follow-up in terms of the next time this runs on cable access. So welcome to our audience, whether it's tonight or whether it's in a couple of weeks. Thinking back just a couple of months ago, on June 10th, we had our second annual graduation right in Oregon High School. And of course, it's graduation day, so it's exceedingly warm. And we were privileged to have almost 99% of our students graduate this past year. What that means for us in the district is approximately 3 to 5 students that didn't graduate. Now, we'll continue to work with these 3 to 5 students over the next several months to make sure that they have their opportunity to graduate as well. Another change for this school year, we had just over 4,100 students, or 4,100 students that we're projecting. Last year we projected our highest ever enrollment, which was 4,000 students, and we're looking forward to continuing to grow as a district. This year is also an important year for us because it is the third year of our teacher compensation plan. That was approved by the community in 2016, and this is the third year where we are fully implemented, and we had the funds available to implement our plan exactly the way it was presented to the community back in 2016. And then lastly, this is a report from our last school year, and it's our student achievement report. We prepare a student achievement report each year for the board and present it to the board. This year's student achievement report should be ready by our first board meeting in November to share with the board, and of course we'll provide it throughout the year to our community as well. For those of you that have been tuned in for a few years, you're very familiar with our mission statement, and our mission statement is a bit longer than this, but this answers the question why we exist. And it's about helping students acquire the skills, knowledge, and attitudes to achieve their individual potential. One of the things that's unique about our mission statement is we haven't changed it since the early 1990s. It's as time-honored today as it was when it was developed back in the early 90s. Of course, something that many of you are familiar with and you've seen throughout our schools are 5 values. These values were established based on work that we completed with a community-wide strategic plan back in August of 2015. Our 5 values, and you'll notice at the center, the whole child emphasis, then connecting with powerful and relevant learning experiences, educational equity, something that's really unique in our district, the strong community and family partnerships that we have. And then the top portion, our caring and professional educators, which was at the center of the work we've done with our teacher compensation plan. Here's a picture of our school board from this past year. It's also our current school board as they were newly elected in April, and our 2 high school representatives. We have 5 main board priorities, and what I'm going to share tonight is a high-level overview of items that the board has us working on for this school year. And you'll notice, if you recall last year's and previous years, there is a sense of consistency and overlap. The first one is the board's paper, The Path Forward, and I believe what we are now on our 8th year of our personalized learning initiative. We continue to work on this board priority. Secondly, working on the next phase of our facility and referendum planning to address the enrollment projections that the Growth Task Force reported to the board almost a year ago now. Third, I already mentioned it, overseeing the implementation of the teacher compensation plan. Again, this was a critical piece for us to continue to attract, retain, and develop quality teachers in our system. one of the messages we talked about during this teacher compensation plan was making sure that we had a quality teacher in every classroom. That has become challenging over the last 3 or 4 years because there are less educators in our pool, and our applicant pools have been smaller than they have been historically. The good news is we are a district where professional educators want to be. So while our pool is smaller, we've still been able to attract quality candidates and, just as important, retain teachers that have been with us for years and years. Our fourth item, it makes me smile a bit because I remember when we started the equity initiative, it seems like just a few years ago, and this is our 3rd year of educational equity, although we've been talking about educational equity for a number of years, and that has really flourished in the district. And then the last board priority, the ongoing work of our task forces or ad hoc committees. I have a slide coming up identifying some of their work. We can go back to the environmental task force, which has been instrumental in our curriculum development as well as in our school design and operation. Our growth task force, which brought a recommendation to the board that included the growth of an additional 2,000 students in the district over the next 12 years. Our youth sports and athletic task force, which is making a report to the board on Monday, October 8th, and then a staffing task force that is just getting started as we prepare for this next year's staffing. I narrowed down 3 items to visit about real quickly, and that's task force work, because I hope by now everyone, when we say task force or committee work, you understand that that is collaborative work. That is not work that's done by 1 or 2 individuals. It's work that is done by a small work group, vetting their work then with a larger group, and ultimately reporting to the board. Secondly, community support. And then third, the November 6, 2018 referendum. Here's a quick review on task forces and ad hoc committees. I like the complete check mark. That shows that we are results oriented and that we complete our work. The first 4 are items that have been completed. I didn't mention the board apportionment committee. That's a committee that our school board established to re-look at board seats and apportionment throughout the community. The board requested 3 former school board presidents that are now retired from the school board to do that work. They did an outstanding job along with Gina Jonan and completed their work in just a couple of meetings, which was pretty amazing. Two task force or ad hoc groups that we're working on right now. One being the staffing committee. We're just getting that started. And the second one, the 4C review committee, we are just getting that one started as well. Here's something that is a unique distinguishing characteristic in our district, and that's the Friends of the Oregon School District. I had the opportunity to attend their annual meeting this past July. There were about 35 community members that came on a night. It was a tough night to have an annual meeting. It was about 75 degrees, low humidity outside, but there were almost 40 community members that came to focus on the Friends of the Oregon School District. They have been strong partners with the district. They've worked on a number of projects with us and basically helping lifting up young people in our community and providing them with needed resources. The next 10 slides are a quick summary of the referendum work the referendum presentation that we've made a few times and will continue to make until November 6th. There's a quick table of contents here. We'll cover 5 different items. Here's item number 1. It sort of sums it all up. It's the district vision, and that's preparing young people so they can graduate. That's one of the school board member or the school board student members from last year, Ellen Martin, on graduation day this past June. Again, our values, I shared that information before. That really is at the center of all of our decision making. Again, something not super unique here, but it's been part of our history, and that is we bring together the community to plan for our future. There's just no better way to say it. 4 or 5 people don't plan for our future. We bring a broad group of stakeholders together to do the research, and then ultimately to bring a recommendation to the board. Here's some background information. I love this picture. It's 3 young people working together. It looks like 2 people are working together, and one young person is doing some watching. But the whole idea is it's the power of learning. And you'll notice this is a non-traditional classroom. You don't see a desk. You don't see a teacher. These are 3 young people working together in outdoor education. Here's a little reminder of our planning for the future. It all started with the 2014 referendum. Andy shared information earlier tonight that we're finally paying the final bills with that 2014 referendum. Again, that referendum was for just over $54 million. It included school safety, it included a green initiative, and it included additional learning spaces throughout our community. Then in 2016, our referendum for the teacher comp plan, followed by 2017, the board establishing a growth task force to study enrollment growth in the district and our facilities. As we think about our needs, it's really, you can almost sum them up in one number. And here it is. An additional 2,000 students by the year 2030. 2,000 students is a lot of young people. And it's a lot of young people in terms of our size when we start at around 4,000 students. That's a significant growth on a K-12 basis. And frankly, right now, we do not have enough facility space to address those 2,000 students without going to referendum. But we have a plan. Here's a little reminder. What I learned as I've been out in the community talking to folks about the district's boundary, there's a little surprise at the size of our district. Size in terms of acres and size in terms of miles. We are over 80 square miles as a school district. We're also, I'll say, thin and long as a school district. You'll notice we're not real wide from east to west, but in terms of north to south, we go almost to the belt line as our northern boundary, and to the south down to Rock County and Greene County. And you'll notice the Village of Oregon, where 5 of our schools are located, are basically right in the center of the school district, along with Brooklyn being the southernmost district or school in our district. What the additional 2,000 students mean for our schools? Significant growth without additional space results in overcrowding. It is a simple message. As I've talked to parents and we've shared information about the referendum, virtually every parent walks by me and says, "You don't need to tell me about the overcrowding. I see it. We're in the schools every day." That's a challenge in a growing district, overcrowding. But we have a plan to solve that. Here's the first level of overcrowding on a K-8 basis. And you'll notice in the year 2020, that's when we will have some significant overcrowding. Again, this just focuses on K-8. One of the things the board was very farsighted in terms of the 2014 referendum. We are set with capacity space at the high school well into I'll say 2025. And if we put on a few small classroom additions that likely we could do without a referendum after 2025, we will be set at the high school through 2030. Here's another summary of the impact on our current schools. You'll notice a theme. RCI is overcrowded by 2020. We need 7 additional classrooms on our current growth rate by the year 2020. All 3 of our elementary schools will be overcrowded by 2020. As I talked to parents over the last 3.5 weeks of school, they've all reminded me there is overcrowding and there's being overcrowded. We already feel that we have overcrowding, and we're moving very quickly, actually in 2 years, to being overcrowded. Again, you'll notice at the middle school and the high school, the middle school will approach capacity by the year 2025, and we have a plan for that. And the high school can handle capacity through the year 2030. Now looking at today, 2018, our referendum that's coming up has 2 parts to it. We call it Phase 1. The Phase 1 part in 2018 is for a K-6 elementary school that will be located in the northern part of the district. In the future, we refer to that as Phase 2. It could be as early as 2022. It could be after 2022 based on our enrollment. And in that phase, we'll build a new 6, 7, 8 middle school to address the enrollment as it moves through our system. Here's our solution for kids. One of the things we've tried to build on since the 2014 referendum is we're going to listen first, come up with a plan, have that plan factored around our district values, and then communicate that message throughout the community. One thing our community told us when we did focus groups, and we did almost a dozen this April and May, was build for today and tomorrow. Don't just build for today, especially as we're looking at an additional 2,000 students. A second theme they provided to us was allow for flexibility over time. You'll notice that with the elementary proposal, we'll open as a K-6 if approved, and eventually transfer that school to a K-5 elementary. And then lastly, our time-honored district values, the whole child emphasis, educational equity, rigorous classroom experiences, community support, and caring educators. We need to weave that around any plans that we have in the future for facilities. Here's the first phase. The first phase is build a new K-6 elementary school that would open in 2021, or the 2020/21 school year, or said better, in September of 2020. Then phase 2 in the future, again, it could be as early as 2020 to be open in 2024, or it could be later based on our enrollment increases at the time. That's build the new 6-8 middle school, again, estimated to be needed around 2024, and then we transfer all of our elementary schools to K-5 and have 2, 6, 7, 8 middle schools. And that's a really important part. You might think, why not just build one big mega school? We've talked with our community, we've talked with our staff, we learned through our focus groups, and we've established the size of the schools to be no larger at the elementary level than 600 students. That's a critical piece. There are some districts that have mega schools, a 2,000 student middle school, a 1,000 student middle school. We don't believe, based on feedback we've received from the community, that that's in our best interest. There are 2 questions on the November 6th referendum. Just like with our previous referendum in 2014, the first question, I'll call it a capital question, and that's the new K-6 elementary school at $44.9 million. And then question number 2 is operating and maintenance at $2.1 million. Those are operational expenses for the new middle school, along with maintenance, a maintenance referendum that has been approved by the community twice over 2 10-year periods. So that part is really a flat, no additional tax costs to the community. I will say I've had a few community members say, what will it cost to open a new school? We actually believe opening a new school is close to $3 million, but through financial projections that we've worked on, we believe our growth will pay for a portion of that, and the additional operating a referendum question will pay for the balance. Again, at the end of the day, our goal is to plan for growth, to preserve our district values, and to continue that for generations and generations in the district. It's always challenging and a wonderful opportunity as we have growth. There are a number of ways that you can learn more information about our referendum. Here are just a couple. In addition to contacting us at any time, we're coming up on our second open house on Saturday, October 6th from 10 to 11:30 at Rome Corners, and then our final open house on Monday, October 15th from 6 to 7:30 at Rome Corners. We have shared a significant amount of information already. There are newsletters out in the community. We'll have close to almost 70 community touches by the time we reach November 6th. But if we haven't been able to speak to your community group, just give us a call or an email. You can send it directly to me, and we will arrange to have a speaker at one of your events. Whether that's to a group of 1 or a group of 50, we would be delighted to do that. I will stop and see if there are any questions on the State of the District report. You got to get us back, right? I'll take that as no questions.
Thank you, Dr. Bussler. Suffice it to say that the district is meeting its mission, that academically last year was an excellent year. We're in terrific financial shape as reported by Andy Weiland, which moves us on to planning for next year. And we're going to have 3 motions. We don't have any old business this year, so if we could click to the three motions that we're going to have to consider and approve is adoption of the tax levy, setting of school board salaries, and setting the date for next year's annual meeting. So if we go to the first item, and that is to adopt the tax levy. The board's approved a preliminary budget that has a levy of $26,122,171, and I'd seek a motion to approve adoption of a levy in that amount.
So moved.
Ms. Flanagan with the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Ms. Feeney with the second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of adoption of the tax levy in the amount of $26,122,171 signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? We have a tax levy established. The second motion then is to adopt the school board salaries, and on the screen and in your orange packet are the current school board salaries, and the recommendation is to continue with those, and so I need a motion to approve the school board salaries as set forth in the orange packet and on the screen. Is there a motion to that effect? Mr. Weiland with the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Dr. Bussler with the second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. The adoption of the school board salaries. And the last item we have is to set the meeting for the 2019 annual meeting. So we're going to do that on the 4th Monday in September at 6:30 p.m., which would be September 23, 2019. So I'd need a motion to set the annual meeting for that date. Do I have a motion to that effect? So moved. Mr. LeBrun with the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Ms. Flanagan. The motion is to set the annual meeting for September 23 at 2019 at 6:30. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion carries. And that takes us to the conclusion of our agenda this evening. And I think we just need one more motion, and that would be to adjourn. Mr. Wyland with the motion to adjourn. Is there a second? Mr. Carr with the motion, or the second to the motion. All in favor of adjourning the annual meeting at 7:20 p.m. signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you.